48, lowest production since 52, lowest other hay production since 1988. So tough conditions for hay this season. Hops, you can see there our final production, 101 million pounds there. That's down 12.4% from last year. We had the second highest acres on record, but we had a record low yield this year. And so we actually ended up with a pretty significant dip in production for hops this year. And then lentils, as I mentioned, with some of the other crops rebounded low yield levels last year, giving us a pretty sharp increase in production for this season. Don't think we're advancing there. So if you follow along in your slides in front of you, mustard seeds next up, record high planted and harvested acreage, second highest production on record for mustard seed. Mustard is actually a very drought tolerant crop, and so it became very attractive this year as well. Peanut production, you can see there, finished the season down 12.5% from last year's crop. We did have the third highest yield on record, and even though we're down 12.5% on production, it's still the seventh highest peanut production on record. Peppermint, you can see a pretty sharp decrease in acres driving that production down this year. Potatoes, you can see declines in acres and yield this season for that crop. Actually, the lowest potato production since 1989. And then proso millet, big declines there across both acreage and yield. So overall, much smaller crop this season. There we go. Moving on to rapeseed, kind of the same story I repeat on a lot of these crops, right? So overall, if we think about production down 14.3% there. Rice, you can see that crop also down this year, mainly due to the acreage declines, although yields were off from last year as well. Overall, we did have the 10th highest yield on record, but again, with reduced acres, you're going to have reduced production. California did have their lowest planted acres since 1958. Of course, that's water issues out there, not a big surprise. Safflower, third lowest planted acres on record. Sorghum, big drop there, but again, significant portion of that in Texas and Kansas, both experiencing severe drought conditions this year. In fact, record low planted and harvested acres in Texas this year. And then spearmint, like so many of the other crops, down year over year. Again, rounding out the last crop included in that report, you can see our sugar crops, sugar beets, relatively modest changes from our previous forecast there, but you can see we're looking at 32.6 million tons there. That's down 2.7% from that previous forecast, 11.4% below last year. Sugar cane, actually a little bit better than we had previously forecast. So you can see overall now we're looking, we measured a crop 5.6% larger than last season. Sunflowers again bouncing back from low levels last year. And then tobacco, last but not least, production for 2022. That is our second lowest harvested area on record for tobacco. We've talked about that year after year in recent seasons. The crop just continues to decline. So with that said, let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about 2023. We do have our first look at the 2023 winter wheat acreage coming out today as well. And you can see we are estimating 36, well, actually 37, around 37 million acres. That is up 11.1% from what was planted last season. If we look at that graphically over the recent seasons, you can see actually a fairly sharp rebound over the last couple of seasons compared to where we had been heading in recent years. In fact, that is the highest acreage since 2016. Prices have been strong, and so farmers have responded. If we look at that on a state-by-state basis, you can see increases across most of the growing area. Big increase in Texas. You can see at 26.4%. Of course, they abandoned a lot of cotton, and so they got open ground to plant winter wheat this year. Overall, increasing or unchanged acreage in 30 of the 35 estimating states. So a big rebound there, but yet a few more acres than folks were expecting. So you can see here again that NASS estimate a little bit higher than most of the pre-published expectations, but sometimes with big increases in acreage, it can be a little hard for folks to get a handle on exactly how large that increase might be. So once again, we're going to shift gears, and now we're going to talk about grain stocks. We'll start things off with all wheat stocks, because this is our second quarter for the all wheat stocks. You can see as of December the 1st, 1.28 billion bushels stored. That is down 7%, or 97 million bushels from what was stored at the same time last year. You can see the on-farm stocks actually up sharply year over year, but the off-farm stocks down nearly 17% from the same time last year. We take a look at this graphically, the way this chart is laid out. Each vertical bar represents the beginning supply for each crop season. You can see the 4 horizontal lines representing the quarterly stocks estimates. As I mentioned, second quarter for all wheat. So that orange line does represent the December 1 stocks. That's the lowest December stocks in 2007. Our beginning supply was down 5.7% from the previous year. And looking at our September to November disappearance, 498 million bushels is actually up 25.6% from the same time period a year earlier. But with that said, it is a little bit lower than most of the folks were expecting. So you can see kind of how that compares with the published industry expectations here. Next, we'll move on to the corn stocks, because the beginning stocks, the first quarter stocks for corn. You can see as of December the 1st, 10.8 billion bushels stored. That's down 7.1%, or 832 million bushels. From what was stored at the same time a year earlier. Similar declines for both on-farm and off-farm year over year. Similar graphic to what I showed you for all wheat. Here you can see the beginning supply at 15.1 billion bushels was down 7.4%. From the previous season, and our September to November disappearance, 4.3 billion bushels was actually down 7.9% from the same time a year earlier. A little bit lower, toward the lower end of the expectations here. But again, I mentioned we talk about production here. With production coming in a bit lower than what folks were expecting, it kind of makes sense. The stocks would be a bit lower than folks were expecting as well. So I think overall it kind of ties back together. And fits pretty well with the balance sheet, but also Mark has to say that his turn. We'll move on to soybeans for now, though. 3.02 billion bushels stored as of December the 1st for soybeans. That's down 3.6%, or 114 million bushels year over year. And again, you can see on and off farm both down in similar fashion year over year. And as we look at the graphic for the soybeans, here you can see that beginning supply was down 3.6% year over year in our September to November disappearance for soybeans, 1.53 billion bushels. That's down 3.6% from the same time a year earlier. Thankfully, there's one person that had a much lower published expectation than the others. You can see we fall right in the range. Published expectation from the soybeans, so surely not a surprise there, right? But nonetheless, a little bit lower than most folks were expecting. But again, we reduced the production a bit more than folks were expecting. So I think it makes sense that they would be a bit higher on the stocks expectations as well. Next, we'll take a quick look at the rough price stocks as of December the 1st. Here you can see off 16.7% from the same time a year earlier. Declines in both on and off farm there as well. As we look at things for rice stocks, 193 million hundredweight was our beginning supply. That was down pretty sharply from a year earlier. Our disappearance during the last quarter was actually low a year earlier, but again, a big drop in the beginning supply leading to a drop in stocks compared to last year. The monthly crop production report also has our December 1 hay stocks estimate. And based on what I showed you with hay production this year, probably come as no surprise that we're looking at a 9% reduction in the hay stored as of December the 1st, 71.9 million tons there. You can see fairly sharp declines in Texas and Missouri, our largest storage states there. That's actually overall the lowest December 1 stock since 1954. Our May to November disappearance was 57.6 million tons, actually down 3% from the same time a year earlier, but just not a lot of production feeding into the storage situation this year. If we look at that graphically, again, state by state, on a year by year basis here, you can see pretty sharp declines again in the kind of that central to southern plains and adjacent states there as well. Dry conditions obviously having a big impact there. You do see some ampersands here because we have record low hay stocks in California, Colorado, and Nebraska as of December the 1st. We're getting close, I promise you. We do have a few other stock estimates to talk about today as well. I'll move pretty quickly through these. Barley stocks, you can see up 16.9% year over year, up just 5.9% on the chickpea stocks. Dryable peas up fairly sharply, of course, fairly sharp increase in production there. Durum wheat stocks up 14.6% year over year. Lentil stocks up 12.2%. Oats down slightly, and sorghum stocks again with a big drop in production. We see a pretty sharp cut in these commodities as of December the 1st. Touching on the last data that I have to share with you today, we do have updated citrus forecasts in our monthly crop production report today as well. As is normally the case in January, we have all states reporting. So overall, we are now forecasting all orange production at 2.70 million tons. That is down 4.6% from the previous forecast, 22.1% below what was produced last year. If we look at Florida, another 2 million box reduction compared to last month's forecast. No change on the non-Valencias, but the Valencias off that 2 million bushels or million boxes from last month. If we look at Florida, the non-Valencias, we're now looking at essentially a record low level on the Valencias. It's the lowest level since the 1937-38 season. So that means all oranges in Florida expected to be the lowest level since the 1930-31 season. California, all oranges were down 1 million boxes from their previous forecast. That was all in the Valencia crop there, and no change to the all oranges in Texas this month. Looking at grapefruit, 324,000 tons. That's up just 0.9% from the previous forecast. It is much like the oranges, down fairly sharply year over year. Overall, compared to the previous forecast, we're up just 100,000 boxes. California and Texas are each up 200,000 boxes, but Florida's off 300,000 boxes from the previous forecast. Lemons at 940,000 tons, down from both last forecast and last season. And then last but not least, the tangerines, you can see up fairly sharply year over year. Of course, that's mostly a California crop. Conditions there quite a bit different than what we're experiencing in Florida for citrus this season. Just a couple other slides I'll run through very quickly. Here's a list of some of the upcoming reports over the next month or so. A couple of reminders for folks. Of course, obviously everyone in this room is probably well aware, but we do have the USD Ag Outlook Forum coming up next month. Want to make sure folks have an opportunity to register there. Also, of course, hosting the ICAP conference in May. Early bird registration ending soon, so we wanted to make sure and get a plug out there for folks so they can register and save a few bucks to get out there and do that quickly. And then, of course, as usual, at 1 o'clock this afternoon, I will be on Twitter hosting our regular StatCat series, where on the off chance anybody has any questions about today's report, I suspect I might get a question or two. I will be out there as long as necessary to wade through those questions that folks might have today.
So you're assuming you're going to get through my questions by the time that.
I'm assuming it's going to be simultaneous. Just a guess.
All right.
And that is the last slide that I have. So I'm going to turn things over to Mark. We'll get to your questions in a little while. All right. Word is yours. All right. Thank you. All right. Good. Make sure that this works for me here. And it does. All right. Good afternoon. And so I've got, again, also not quite as much information as Lance had to go through, but quite a bit. I'm going to try to go through as quick as I can. Dr. Bernard, I know if you have other meetings or something at 1, don't worry if you have to leave. I'm going to go through this, and we're always available later if you have questions or you need more info. So the WASDE report. January, just a couple things to note. You just saw a lot of information from that. We got all of that information early this morning, so our guys worked hard to incorporate it into all of the domestic balance sheets, update those supply and use estimates.
And then we also, as we always do, we're also looking at global supply and demand conditions. And just a couple things to note here. We're going to talk a little bit about assessing Russia's wheat production estimate. That should be kind of interesting. We made some changes to India's cotton crop, and we'll talk a little bit about Argentina corn and soybeans, where no big surprise there. It's been dry, so we cut those crops there. Let's start out with wheat. A couple things to note here. You'll see not any huge changes in terms of production. European Union production estimate raised a bit there. That's mainly in Eastern Europe, Hungary, and a few other Eastern European countries. Ukraine wheat production estimate raised. That's just admin data. That's Ukraine data. China production reduced, and you'll see this in many of the production slides coming up. We got new information from China from NBS, and we incorporated that directly. Now, the one item here that we'll talk about a little bit more that's just worth noting is no change in our Russia production wheat production forecast, and that is despite a pretty large production forecast from WASDE from Russia. So we're going to talk just a little bit about why we held our forecast where it is. Just real quick review of the region that we're talking about here in the Black Sea. Now, in Russia, if you look at all the main wheat production regions, precipitation has been good, generally favorable throughout the critical parts of the growing season. And vegetation health appeared pretty good throughout the growing season as well. So there is certainly evidence that the crop is large, no question about it. But the questions come up when you look at the production, that the official Russian production estimates for their wheat crop. They are at over almost 102 million metric tons. We are holding at 91 million, and that is still a record. That's up 21% from last year. But when you look at Russia's forecast, that would be a 36% change year over year. That would be 19% higher than the previous record, and 30% above the 5-year average. And frankly, based on the information we have, the weather data, the VHI, the satellite imagery, we can't quite justify that large of an increase. So we're sticking with what we got. Like I said, still record production for Russia, 91 million metric tons, but it's hard to account for where that extra 11 million metric tons that Russia is forecasting is coming from. And one possibility, of course, and this is just speculation, when you look at the regions in the Ukraine conflict, sort of the wheat production regions that are being contested, those regions and the kind of hashes there, that last year accounted for about 10 million tons. So maybe that could account for where Russia's coming up with their estimates. They're just counting that in their own. But we will get new information from WASDE in March, and maybe we'll get more detail. This latest estimate did not have production broken down by region within Russia. So again, we will readdress this when we get new information in March. So global balance sheet, a couple things to note here. Feed use up a bit this month, adjusted higher. That's mainly higher feed use in the U.S., partially offset by lower feed and residual in Ukraine. We raised Ukraine's wheat export forecast, increased to 500,000 tons to 13 million. So with higher exports, there's going to be a lower feed and residual for Ukraine. So that's part of that. Speaking of trade, higher trade forecast there too. That is also reflecting primarily higher exports from the EU and Ukraine, offset a bit by lower exports from India, given some of their export controls. And ending stocks up a bit, as you can see. Now, getting into the US balance sheet, yeah, I put up the back year, the old year, just because we did make a change there based on a revision to the September 1 grain stocks that led us to reduce the feed and residual estimate for the old crop year, and that leads to a corresponding increase in ending stocks, which means that we're carrying in slightly higher stocks. Again, these are relatively small, slightly higher beginning stocks into the new crop year. Other change we made in the new crop year, increased seed use, and that reflects those winter wheat seeding, estimate that we just saw from Lance. Feed and residual use raised their rates as well. That is also reflecting implied disappearance from the December 1 stocks report. And ending stocks down just a bit, and with no change in our season average market price. So moving into rice, pretty small changes on the global production side. Again, China, that reduction of 1.1 million tons is official China data from the National Bureau of Statistics. And the increased production from India there, that's a post estimate from forecast from Post that we accepted. Global balance sheet for rice, total use down a bit. That is largely China, and again, that is consistent with lower production as well that I just reported for China. Trade, higher exports from India and Brazil, higher supplies in India as well, and ending stocks up a bit. That is mainly higher stocks in Brazil, Vietnam, and India. And ending stocks up this month a bit, but still down pretty sharply year over year. Those would be the lowest global ending stocks since 2017-18 crop year. US balance sheet for rice, again incorporating the changes that we got from the crop production report this morning, showing a pretty sharp reduction in supplies, US supplies, tightening up US supplies, and at the same time we also are incorporating the rice stocks information, which implied higher domestic use. So lower supplies, higher use, tightening up ending stocks, as you can see. And we also reduced our export forecast, 3 million hundredweight, as you can see. So of that 3 million, 2 million of that is long grain, a reduction in the long grain export forecast. Just kind of a similar story that we've been talking about. Stiff competition in the Western Hemisphere, including exports from Mexico. And then for medium short grain, just not very price competitive. So raise the average market price, season average market price 20 cents per hundredweight, and that is mostly long grain and other state medium and shorts. That's outside of California. Ending stocks for US, that would be the lowest since the 2017-2018 crop year. Moving into corn production, again, I put up the back year just because we did make a change in make an adjustment for Argentina back year, and that is just reflecting observed use data. So adjusted that the size of that crop accordingly to better line up with the use data that we have. So then for the new crop year, for the current crop year, 2022-2023, Argentina cut production there. I mentioned that on my first slide. We'll go a little bit more detail into that. Brazil, corn production lowered as well. That is also reflecting drought conditions in the southern part of the country, southern Brazil, consistent with the conditions that we're seeing in Argentina. And then again, China increased their production estimate. Again, that is based on NBS data from China. So real quick, just Argentina corn and soybean. As I said, this isn't this is something that we've been talking about for several months now. It has been dry and it continues to be dry. Dry conditions persisted through December. And temperatures are also above average. So it's been dry, it's been hot. It just so combination suggests concerns about yield. Just another way to look at the relative lack of rainfall. Rainfall trace well below average, and temperatures well above average. So the data is pretty clear that there are some concerns on the horizon, but it is still early. That crop is still in its early stages and still being planted. So this is the first official cut to those crops that we made based on this weather analysis. So Argentina corn, we reduced 3 million metric tons from last month. And while we're talking about Argentina, we might as well also just cover soybeans. Same, crop grown in the same areas, facing the same conditions. We lowered soybean production 4 million tons from last month. So global corn balance sheet, a few things to talk about here. Again, I mentioned old crop year. Again, I just put that up since I also put it up on the production side. Talked about the change in adjustment to production and in the back year. Also, an adjustment to trade in the back year. That's an increase in exports by Brazil late in the season. Strong exports from Brazil in December, expected to continue into January. And that accounts for the back year. When we talk about the new crop year, a couple things to note here. Feed use down. That's mainly Ukraine, U.S., and Brazil. And lower feed use in Ukraine, that reflects the fact that just like with wheat, we did raise Ukraine's corn export forecast. Raised at 3 million tons, 20.5, I think. That's right. Okay, 20.5. So raised at 3 million. What else? Feed use so lower in Ukraine, U.S., and Brazil, offset to some degree by higher in China. Ending stocks tightening up. That's Brazil, Ukraine, U.S., which we'll talk about on the next slide. Trade, so lower exports out of the U.S. and Argentina, not too surprising. In Argentina, smaller crop, U.S. also smaller crop, we'll talk about. And offset by higher exports out of Ukraine. So U.S. balance sheet, again, what we're doing here, of course, is incorporating the new information we got from NAS this morning that showed a cut in the size of the current crop. So supply tightening up. Exports, exports down sharply as well. A couple things, of course, driving that. Of course, on the one hand, tighter supplies, reflecting these changes we got today, but also sales have been lagging already. So, so the combination of the two suggests we needed to lower our export forecast. And those would be the lowest exports since the 2019, 2020 crop year. Right. Since you were talking about feed residual use, that was also adjusted based on indicated disappearance from stock report. So again, with these balance sheets, as you know, we're incorporating all the information we got from NASDE this morning. All right, moving into soybeans, soybean production. Again, I put up the back here because we did make a change in our production forecast, back year production estimate for Brazil. And again, that's just based on use data, higher than expected use, including strong exports out of Brazil. It just suggests that crop had to be bigger than we had originally reported. So adjusted that accordingly. And for new crop year production, a couple things. We already talked about Argentina, cut that crop based on drought conditions, lack of rain and heat in Argentina. Brazil, on the other hand, raised our Brazil soybean production forecast. That is based on an area forecast from CONABI. So CONABI data there. And China, yet again, NBS data, official China data that we incorporated directly. Soybean balance sheet. So that 2.6 million ton increase in beginning stocks, that reflects that change in the Brazil production that I showed on the previous slide. Crush reduced to 2 million tons. That reflects lower crush in Argentina and China, offset to some degree by higher crush in Brazil. Trade down, exports, global exports down. So lower exports out of the US, out of the United States and Argentina, offset to some degree by higher exports from Brazil, strong export competition from Brazil. Ending stocks up just a bit, and that is largely a slight increase in Brazil as well. China imports reduced 2 million metric tons, higher production in China and lower crush. So reduce that import forecast. U.S. balance sheet. Again, incorporating the changes we got from NASDE this morning, showing lower production than we had been carrying in the balance sheet. A lot of that will be is balanced by reduced exports. Their lower export forecast is driven really by three factors. One, obviously, the lower supplies. Also, lower China demand, reduced imports from China globally, and also more competition from Brazil. So those kind of three issues are putting some pressure on our export forecast. Ending stocks tightening up a bit. We raised the season average market price 20 cents per bushel. So let's talk about cotton, cotton production. A couple of things that stand out here. Of course, the United States that we'll talk about in a couple of slides going forward here. Argentina production forecast reduced. Again, that's consistent with dry conditions we talked about for corn and soybeans. Brazil production forecast increased a bit, and that is based on a post report on cotton area that we incorporated. And India cotton production down, and we will talk about that in a little bit of detail here. So we cut India's production 1 million bales. And just to quickly, this is key cotton production areas in India. And kind of the issue that's really driving our reduction in our India production forecast this month is just the fact that arrivals have been very slow. And this, there's a couple trains of thought on that. One, that farmers are just holding the cotton, waiting for a higher price. The other possibility is that the cotton just isn't there. The crop is smaller than we expected. So we thought it was worth a good kind of deep dive back to look at that crop potential. And indeed, we know this. We knew that this was a fact, but it had been exceedingly wet in the main cotton production regions. And, as we talked a lot about Pakistan, and the flooding conditions there, the excess rain. Well, for those storms to get to Pakistan, they had to come across India. So, much of those same rainy conditions came across the key cotton production regions in India. And that just, supports the, likelihood that crop just did not, it was damaged more than we had expected. We didn't fully account for the negative consequences of all that excess rain. So our production forecast for this month for India down about 4%, but area is still up. This is all based on yield, and total production is still up year over year. The global cotton balance sheet. Consumption cut again this month. Couple things driving that. One, lower production in India. So part of that is India, but also lower consumption in Vietnam and Indonesia. And certainly there's a world economy component to this too. Global economic uncertainty showing up in this lower consumption forecast. In terms of trade, so regarding the importing countries, lower imports, we reduced our import forecasts for Indonesia, China, and Vietnam, and exports are reduced in the US and India. Again, India lower, smaller crop. US balance sheet for cotton. Basically, this can be summarized: higher production. We've heard about that from Lance just a few minutes ago. Higher production, reduced exports, and that is just reflecting the fact that those, there's just been a very slow pace of sales. Exports were under some pressure already. Now we have higher production as well, so all of that adds up to an increase in ending stocks. And with those higher ending stocks, not too surprising that we're going to be expecting lower prices. We're also observing lower prices, and we reduced our season average market price 2 cents a pound. Okay, moving into sugar. Real quick, back here, small changes in the back here, but just kind of worth noting here. The increase you see there, 19,000 short tons for cane in 2021-2022 crop year. That just reflects that's production in Louisiana. It was harvested in September, so that pulled some production out of the current crop year into the back year. Ending stocks is basically set from by SMD data at this point, so the balance comes out of use. So for the new crop year, production beet production forecast up quite a bit this month. We're expecting higher sugar recovery. This is based on processor data, SMD data. Reported in SMD data. Cane production up as well, mainly reflecting higher production out of Louisiana, reported by NASS. TRQ imports, we reduced 85,000 short tons this month, and that just reflects an increase in the shortfall. If you recall, the TRQ was extended until December 31, but still didn't seem to have enough of an effect to fill that TRQ. So that should be so that's where we are with regards to TRQ. High tier increased 50,000 short tons just based on pace, especially refined sugar. And when you add it all up, we're showing higher supplies, higher ending stocks, and the stock use ratio right now stands at 14.9%. Sugar, Mexico, small changes here, and didn't make any changes to Mexico's production. Some analysts out there expect it to go higher, to be increased. But we're waiting for better evidence that that is the case. So no changes on production side. Small changes in exports, that increase in 1,000 metric tons. That's actually to non-U.S. markets, and it balances by a reduction in the IMEX program. So minor. All right, kind of wrap things up with the animal side of the WASDE. Meat production and prices. Beef production for 2022 reduced this month, mainly reflecting lower steer and heifer slaughter, offset to some degree by higher cow slaughter, and also the fact that the weather was, the extreme cold and snow conditions we had at the end of 2022. A lot of plants shut down, so some of that production just shifted into the new crop year because of the timing of when those weather events occurred. For 2023, we raised our beef production forecast, reflecting expectations of continued high cow slaughter. Pork, for the rest of 2022, we're just basically truing up, again, November data, slaughter data. So it's pretty small changes there. Forecasting for the current calendar year 2023, the pork production forecast was raised. That reflects farrowing intentions out of the recent hogs and pigs report. Broiler production forecast pulled back a bit, reflecting hatchery, first quarter hatchery data, and turkey production forecast also adjusted based on hatchery data. Prices for 2022 for steers, hogs, and poultry, those are final data now. So they are what they are, and they're going to remain at those levels. For 2023, steer price forecast, we raised $2.75 a hundredweight, just reflecting tighter supplies and expectations that demand will remain strong. And also for hogs, raised our price forecast, also reflecting strong demand. And some of the changes for broilers and turkey, again, just kind of carrying conditions through from last year. Meat trade, not much to say about for 2022. Again, just kind of small adjustments based on November trade data. For 2023, raised our pork production, our pork export forecast, reflecting that higher production forecast. And turkey, I'll just note, turkey exports pulled back, which is relatively large amount relative to the size of those exports, just based on higher prices. Beef import forecast that increase that mainly reflects product coming in from Brazil. Just to wrap things up real quick here with dairy, milk production for 2022 pulled back based on lower milk per cow in the fourth quarter. 2023 milk production down based on lower cow numbers, and that reflects in part softening prices, which I'll show you on the next slide when we wrap things up. And 2022 export butter and cheese export forecast, that basis raised. Cheese for us, the skim solid basis in export forecast increases also based on cheese, higher cheese exports. For 2023, fat basis in export increase is reflecting butter, higher butter exports, and for skim solids imports, higher imports of lactose, and exports would be skim milk powder. So finish things up here with prices. 2022, again, final prices for all of the products in the classes except for the all milk price that will continue to be adjusted. The rest of the prices are final. 2023 prices, as you can see, reduced our price forecasts across the board. for all of the products, reflecting weakening demand and strong international competition. And those lower product prices lead directly to lower class prices, or the class 3 price reduction is mainly reflecting lower prices for cheese and whey. Class 4 reflecting lower prices for butter and non-fat dry milk. And when you add it all up, our all milk price forecast reduced by $1.10 per hundredweight. Pretty sharp production year over year, and this is likely to lead to some dairy margin protection program payments. So that's where I'll end it. That's a quick walk through the WASDE. Thank you to everyone who attended today, including those online. We'll be right back here next month. I look forward to seeing you then, and I will now turn